What if I told you that hidden behind the glittering palaces, perfumed gardens, and towering minarets of the Ottoman Empire was a world darker than most of us could ever imagine? A world where beauty was currency, youth was a cage, and desire was both celebrated and feared. Not in the stories of sultans and their wives, not in the harems we think we know, but in a secret realm where young boys, barely into their teenage years, were handpicked, groomed, and displayed like living treasures. They were not slaves in chains, nor soldiers on the battlefield. They were something else entirely, male concubines, adored and paraded as symbols of power and prestige, yet trapped in a life that was both luxurious and suffocating. Step inside the palace walls of Istanbul at the height of the empire, and you would find them, dozens, sometimes hundreds of boys, chosen from conquered lands or gifted by allies, trained not only in etiquette and poetry, but in the art of companionship. They were called yamaks, and their beauty alone could elevate or destroy their lives. Venetian envoys, who glimpsed this hidden court, wrote in astonishment, noting that up to 500 youths could be found within the Sultan's palace at once, their every movement carefully observed, their futures dangling on the whims of powerful men. Some were as young as 8, their childhoods stolen, replaced by silks, songs, and secrets. To the outside world, they were the delights of the empire, symbols of refinement that no man of status could resist keeping near. Ottoman culture did not frame relationships in the categories we use today. A man's masculinity was not questioned if he adored another male. It was not about gender, it was about dominance. The one who loved remained powerful, while the one who was loved was ornamental, exalted, yet vulnerable. Within this paradox, the boys shone like jewels under candlelight, admired and praised, but always replaceable, their value fading as swiftly as their youth. Imagine their daily lives. By day, they studied languages, music, dance, and politics, their minds sharpened as much as their beauty. By night, they lived behind guarded doors, unsure whether tomorrow would bring them honor, marriage, or quiet dismissal. They were celebrated companions of officials, favorites of sultans, whispered about in corridors, their names etched into poems as though they were mythical beings rather than flesh and blood. And yet, behind the silks and songs, the truth was far from beautiful. To be chosen was to escape poverty and to live in luxury, yes, but it was also to be watched, controlled, and eventually discarded when your prime had passed. But perhaps the cruelest truth was this: admiration did not mean safety. At any moment, politics could turn, whispers could condemn, and a boy once adored could find himself shamed or imprisoned. The empire's tolerance was never unconditional. It was as fragile as glass, ready to shatter when the world outside began to change. One of the most haunting stories to survive from this era is that of Tahir and Tib. They were young Ottomans, captured by Christian noblemen in a world where faith, politics, and desire collided violently. Most would imagine torment at the hands of their captors, but what unfolded was stranger, almost otherworldly. Their captors fell in love with them. They showered them with gifts, lavished them with kindness, and for a brief, flickering moment, it seemed as though love, true, dangerous love, might rise above the cruelty of the world. But empires do not forgive such tenderness. Their bond was discovered, branded as shameful, punished with imprisonment and humiliation. It was a reminder that even in a culture where beauty was worshipped, love itself was still a perilous crime. And yet, the paradox deepened. For centuries, Ottoman soldiers, courtiers, and even the elite janissaries were known to keep such relationships. In some cases, boys were granted privileges and even tax exemptions, given honors in exchange for their companionship. What seemed to outsiders like sin or corruption was woven into the fabric of courtly life, accepted and sometimes even praised. But in the shadows, a question lingered. Were these boys free, or were they gilded captives? Were they cherished, or simply possessed? Pause for a moment and think of the silence in those palace corridors at night, the flicker of lanterns on stone walls, the weight of eyes watching your every move, to live adored, but never to belong to yourself. It is in these silences, in these unspoken spaces, that the real horror of the Ottoman concubines' world emerges, not the violence of chains, but the soft suffocation of luxury turned prison. And if these stories sound unsettling, if they make you lean in with both fascination and unease, then you are exactly where you should be, because history is not just about kings and empires. It is about the shadows they leave behind. And if you want to keep walking with us into those shadows, peeling back the secrets that the past tried to bury, make sure you join this journey. Subscribe, and together we'll uncover the parts of history that whisper, that haunt, and that demand not to be forgotten. But this story is not finished, for the world of the male beloved would not last forever. The empire that once celebrated these relationships would soon be struck by a storm it could not withstand. Western ideas crept in like a plague, and with them came judgment, shame, and the slow erasure of everything that had been so openly displayed. The Sultan's treasures would become society's outcasts, and when the final blow fell, it would leave scars that linger even today. The empire's hidden world of desire was about to collide with the cold weight of law, morality, and violence. And when it did, the beauty of the yamaks would fade into silence, replaced by something far more terrifying. The question is, what happens when love itself is outlawed? What happens when love itself is outlawed? The answer begins in the 18th century, when the Ottoman Empire, once the seat of tolerance and cultural splendor, opened its gates to Western diplomacy, trade, and ideology. With these arrivals came new technologies, new fashions, and new philosophies, but also something far more insidious. Western morality crept into the empire like smoke seeping under a locked door, carrying with it rigid ideas of sin, shame, and propriety. Where once the beauty of young male companions had been praised in poetry and immortalized in song, it now became something whispered about, something dangerous, something to be hidden. At first, the change was subtle. The courtiers still kept their companions, the janissaries still formed their bonds, and the yamaks still lived within palace walls. But the tone was shifting. Venetian envoys, who had once written in awe, began to sense a discomfort in their Ottoman hosts. What was once proudly flaunted was now spoken of in hushed voices, as if the empire itself was beginning to blush under Europe's gaze. The yamaks, once the delight of sultans, became ghosts moving through corridors, their silken robes now the trappings of secrets instead of symbols of power. Then came the hammer blow. In 1858, the Ottoman Penal Code introduced laws that struck at the very heart of this centuries-old tradition. For the first time, public acts deemed contrary to modesty and shame were criminalized. The punishment was severe: imprisonment, fines, and a stain of dishonor that could never be washed away. What had once been an open expression of companionship and admiration was now rebranded as indecency, as filth to be rooted out. The consequences were immediate and brutal. In Istanbul, men were beaten in the streets. Their heads were shaved in public as an act of humiliation. Some were violated under the banner of punishment, reminders that cruelty could disguise itself as morality. The message was clear: what was once tolerated, even celebrated, would no longer be forgiven. The age of the male beloved was over. And yet, as history has shown us time and again, the heart does not obey the law. Love does not wither just because a decree demands it. The story of Tahir and Tib, the young Ottomans who had once been captured and adored by Christian noblemen, did not end with imprisonment. After being jailed for sodomy, they were eventually released, but their lovers remained behind bars, refusing to accept this fate. The Christian noblemen did the unthinkable. They broke free from prison, reunited with Tahir and Tib, and converted to Islam, believing that in adopting the faith of the empire, they could shield their love from persecution. It was an act of devotion so bold it should have rewritten their destiny. But history does not bend easily, and their gamble was not enough. Society, whether Christian or Muslim, was not ready for their truth. Their names faded from records, their story surviving only as a haunting fragment of what once was. They remind us that even in an age of empire, where beauty was worshipped, the human heart remained the most dangerous treasure of all. By the late 19th century, women had replaced boys as the objects of desire in Ottoman courts. Writers like Ahmed Cevdet Pasha mourned this cultural transformation, lamenting in his works that women lovers have increased in number while boy beloveds have decreased, as if the people of Lot have been swallowed by the earth. It was not just the end of a custom, but the burial of an entire era of love, erased by foreign morality and political necessity. Where once poetry spoke of youthful male beauty, it now shifted to female allure. Where once Yamaks lived in the palace, their quarters filled with music and laughter, silence now lingered. The West had not only reshaped Ottoman politics and economy, it had redefined love itself. And in doing so, it condemned centuries of tradition to the shadows. What was once open became hidden. What was once accepted became forbidden. Behind the new morality was an old fear: the fear of desire uncontrolled, of love ungoverned, of beauty that could not be possessed by the rigid lines of law and society. Today, little remains of this hidden world. Documentation is scarce, burned away by the shame of later generations who wanted to forget, who wanted to scrub clean the contradictions of their past. But if you listen closely, you can still hear their echoes in the poetry that survives, in the Venetian accounts that describe palaces filled with radiant boys, in the fragments of Tahir and Tib's story, whispering that even in the darkest prisons, love still dared to endure. And perhaps that is the most haunting truth of all. For while the empire sought to erase their existence, while law and violence conspired to silence their names, the reality is that passion never truly dies. It adapts, it hides, it lingers in the shadows, waiting for the day when it can breathe freely again. So the next time you hear of the grandeur of the Ottoman Empire, its vast armies, its gleaming domes, its magnificent sultans, remember that behind the gilded facade was a secret world of silken cages and forbidden love, a world that was both celebrated and cursed, cherished and erased, a world that forces us to ask, what do we choose to remember and what do we choose to bury? The Yamaks may be gone, their palaces empty, their songs long silenced, but their memory is still here, woven into the fabric of history, demanding not to be forgotten. And their story leaves us with one chilling reminder. No matter how powerful the empire, no matter how strict the law, the human heart will always find a way to resist. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe the Ottoman practice of keeping male concubines was a form of cultural tolerance ahead of its time? Or was it a gilded prison hiding exploitation and pain? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading.